website. If you just Google DSM-5, it'll describe the process. I'm just going to be super brief here and say that the rationale for including a specific category is, in most cases, unfortunately not all, based on the accumulated scientific evidence that supports its validity as a separate category. So let's use social anxiety disorder, for example, compared to panic disorder. Is there evidence to suggest that the diagnostic criteria identify a distinct group of people that are not the same as people with panic disorder? The answer to that is yes. Is there evidence to suggest that there might be different precipitators or causes of social anxiety disorder and panic disorder? The answer to that question is yes and no. There's some common causes for both of those, but there are also some distinct causes. Is there evidence to suggest that there might be a differential treatment response with a particular kind of treatment, like panic control treatment, psychotherapy, for social anxiety disorder and panic disorder? And the answer there is yes, and slightly no. Exposure is a kind of psychosocial treatment that works across all sorts of anxiety disorders. So what I'm walking you through there is another is an example also of construct validity, even though it doesn't sound like that, but that's really what I'm doing is, is the construct of social anxiety distinct from and have evidence to support it from the construct of panic disorder? And so that's how, in most cases, unfortunately not all, decisions are made for inclusion in the diagnostic system. Somebody else down here had a question. Parsimony, and how does the DSM-5 do with the simplicity and the parsimony? Well, I think that so far that in many ways they're probably going to do well because they've also, I think number 4 up there goes with number 1. Clarity sometimes walks hand in hand with being simple and parsimonious. I think where they goofed up is in the personality disorder section, but not that the dimensions were going to be all that simple. So there are lots of controversies about the DSM-5 and a lot of criticisms, and a lot of these criticisms are justified. There's a fascinating book if you like to read about this stuff by a guy named Gary Greenberg. He wrote a book called The Book of Woe. You can kind of discern what his opinion of the DSM-5 is based on the title of the book, but he walked through detail about the process behind DSM-5 and just generally speaking some criticisms of developing a diagnostic system of mental disorders. Lots of criticism over autism. So it only made it into DSM 33 years ago in DSM-3, but then beginning of DSM-4 there was a separate category called Asperger's syndrome. In DSM-5, Asperger's is now gone. Didn't last very long. What? We cured it? No. What happened was instead now what we have is autism spectrum disorder, which kind of lumps the two of these things together. And so and there's scientific rationale for doing this, that Asperger's, people who met diagnostic criteria for Asperger's had a higher functioning form of autism. And so now people will make a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder and consider the severity of it. If it's milder, autism spectrum disorder, that's probably what we used to call Asperger's. If it's more severe, that's probably what we used to call autism. What's in the middle, that's where it gets a little bit murky. So some other DSM controversies, some of the new categories that have made it into the DSM-5. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder. This has been in the appendix for a number of years. I don't remember now how many diagnostic systems it's been in the appendix. When something is in the appendix of the diagnostic system, what that means is that it's a category in need of further research. So this thing has been kind of laying around in the appendix. We need to study it more, we need to study it more. And people were sort of studying it more, and there has been more research. But it was also very politically unpopular, to call PMS a disorder. Is this an example of where we have gone overboard now? We're pathologizing a group of people, women here, who have a set of symptoms associated with menstruation, and now we're calling it a disorder. So not a very popular decision. Now, if you look at the diagnostic criteria, they're not really talking about PMS. They're talking about a set of symptoms that are pretty severe and that really interfere with people's functioning. But still, it's controversial. Gambling. It's the first non-substance disorder to be in the substance use disorders chapter. Actually, there's a separate little thing for gambling. We have things like methamphetamine use disorder, alcohol use disorder, and nicotine use disorder. Now we've got gambling. It's the first non-substance addictive sort of thing that has made it into the diagnostic system. So is this going to, is there enough evidence to support it? The DSM-5 committee would say yes, that's why we put it in there. But will this now open the floodgates up, so in DSM-6 now we'll have shopping and running and other, sorts of behaviors that are non-substance, that people say, I'm addicted to running, can't stop, kind of thing, right? Can't stop shopping, Home Shopping Network, is getting me in all sorts of trouble. Is that going to be in our next diagnostic system? Time will tell. Hoarding. That is a new disorder that made it into the diagnostic system. And I don't think this one is actually controversial. Really, it's a fascinating and interesting question as to why hoarding has increased in incidence and prevalence so dramatically over the past quarter century. So that's one of the new categories. I talked about some of the controversy associated with autism. Another thing happened in the substance use disorder categories. There used to be, for every substance, I'll just take heroin for example, 2 different kind of categories. There was heroin abuse and heroin dependence. Heroin abuse was just kind of casual use. I don't know if that's actually even possible with heroin, but let's say it was. Casual use, heroin, gets me into mild trouble. It fits better with alcohol. And then heroin dependence, where somebody has developed tolerance, where they need more and more heroin to get the same effect. And if they stop using heroin, they would have withdrawal symptoms, pretty severe ones. So in DSM-5, the distinction between abuse, the kind of milder category, and dependence, the more severe category, is gone. And instead, we just have substance use disorder. And it's very similar to autism in that now clinicians, researchers consider the severity of the problem with heroin, methamphetamine, alcohol, whatever. If it's mild, it would be considered mild. That would be what we used to call alcohol abuse. More severe, it would be severe alcohol use disorder, what we used to call alcohol dependence. Again, it's going to be interesting what's in the middle. Like where is that going to land? And then I also mentioned that the controversy over removing the bereavement exclusion in depression. So let me talk, again, some kind of broad ideas, some pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of just the whole concept of diagnosis in general, because it is controversial. Like, how can we possibly capture the uniqueness of the individual, for example? So what are some advantages? Well, diagnosis should give us a shorthand behavioral description. And so that's an advantage of having a diagnosis. It's easier to communicate among doctors, clinicians, researchers, if you can say that John has a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, or Jean has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. That's shorthand, quick, and presumably communicates a lot of information quicker than saying, well, Jean has hallucinations where she's hearing voices, sometimes 2 voices at a time. Her thinking is disorganized, but oftentimes when we listen, we can't quite follow what she's saying. She also has delusions of reference where she believes messages from the TV are communicating specifically to her. She has a little bit of asociality where she doesn't want to be around people. That just took me 5 minutes to say all of that. Whereas if I said schizophrenia, that is presumably, there's some breakdowns in the system here, communicating that kind of information. It's telling you about the constellation of possible symptoms that Jean might have. What the problem with just using a term like schizophrenia or social anxiety disorder or bulimia or ADHD is that there's widespread, there's another jargony word for you today, heterogeneity within a diagnostic category. So if we had Jean, Joe, and Jane who all had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, they could have completely different symptoms and still meet the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia. So even though I'm using a shorthand behavioral description like schizophrenia, the diagnostic category can be useful in communication, and it's certainly a shorthand description rather than a paragraph of things, I may, it's a large constellation of symptoms that have a lot of room for question when I say that Jane, Joe, and Gene all have schizophrenia. Another thing is that we can rightly ask and maybe even criticize diagnosis for is for whom is this communication, this shorthand behavioral description useful for? So it's useful if, Janelle and I want to communicate with one another, or Mike and I want to communicate with one another about, Jane, Gene, Joe have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. But is it useful to the Gene, Joe, and Jane to know that they have schizophrenia? And the answer to that is yes and no. For some people, receiving a diagnosis is a tremendous relief. Like, I had these symptoms. I thought I should just be able to kind of snap out of it or get over it, or I don't understand it. Okay, now I understand I have this disorder, this thing called schizophrenia. What does that mean now? What do I do with that? For other people, it's a horrible burden. They're mortified. Oh my God, my life is over. I have a diagnosis of a mental disorder. I have schizophrenia, or I have depression, or people are going to look at me funny. So it varies as to whether or not having a shorthand behavioral description is useful for the person who receives the diagnosis. So what's another advantage of diagnosis? Well, ideally what it should do is help you organize important similarities and differences between people. So knowing that somebody has a diagnosis of schizophrenia compared to somebody who has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, that ought to tell you about how they may be the same and how they may be different. So if somebody has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, they will have had an episode of mania where they're feeling really high, on top of the world, loads and loads of energy. That's not the case for people with schizophrenia. They don't have mania. But they also, the two people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder may have some symptoms in common. They may both have delusional beliefs, maybe grandiose delusional beliefs that they are going to be president of the United States, so they already are president of the United States. That's something that the two categories ought to share. So a good diagnostic system ought to help us understand where people with a diagnosis might be similar and might be different. A good diagnostic system ought to help us predict the outcome. So if somebody has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, we ought to know that they're probably going to have an episode where their symptoms are very acute, but then with treatment, usually medication, sometimes combination of medication and a psychosocial or psychotherapy treatment, those symptoms ought to mostly go away. They may have some what are called residual symptoms, but not the acute symptoms. They may have another episode as life goes on, because it tends to be an episodic disorder, but they won't always have these really acute symptoms. Somebody who has a diagnosis of separation anxiety disorder, you might think, well, that's just something for kids, right? Kids have that. They want to go to school. School anxiety. They have anxiety about being separated from their parents. Actually, DSM-5, here's another potentially controversial change, was now adults can be diagnosed with separation anxiety disorder, not separation from the parents, per se, but things that they also feel anxiety about when it comes to different kinds of separation. A good diagnostic system ought to help us understand, like if it was separation anxiety disorder, we used to think, well, maybe they'll be a kid, we can treat them, and that's not likely to be ongoing. I can't say that so much anymore because DSM-5 has now allowed that for adults. So hopefully it will help us predict outcome. A diagnostic system is critical for epidemiology. Now, if you vault ahead to chapter 4, research methods, we talk about in there the field of epidemiology and research methods associated with epidemiology. Here, what I'm referring to is developing incidence rates, the number of new cases of a particular disorder in a particular time period, usually a year. How many new cases of depression were there in the year 2012? That would be incidence. Prevalence, that's a different statistic that epidemiologists derive. How many people have had a lifetime diagnosis at any point in their life, diagnosis of depression? What is the prevalence rate of depression? What is the prevalence rate of schizophrenia? How many people in the United States have schizophrenia? Well, the answer to that is 1%. We wouldn't be able to do that kind of prevalence incidence rates method, the bread and butter of epidemiologists, if we didn't have diagnostic categories. And another advantage is that treatment ought to be, it isn't unfortunately always, but it ought to be faster, more rational and effective if the starting point is a diagnosis. If I know that a diagnosis and it's accurate of somebody with ADHD, my intervention is going to be different and hopefully more effective than if the diagnosis is separation anxiety disorder. An analogy I often use, it's not exactly the best, but it helps illustrate the point, is that if you woke up and you went out to start your car and you couldn't turn the key and nothing happens. And you can't get to school. So what do? You call and have AAA come and tow your car and take it to the shop, and you say, I don't know what's wrong with it, so why don't we just go ahead and replace the battery, replace the starter, replace the transmission, let's just take out the whole engine, and maybe go ahead and replace the side view mirrors. No, you don't do that. What your mechanic does is he or she goes in there and determines, oh, it's your battery instead, or it's a starter, we need to replace that. And then they do a very focal intervention by replacing that which is wrong. Same thing should be true of a good diagnostic system. It allows us to go in a targeted way to intervene with what the problem is. Now, as you'll see as we go throughout the course of the semester, that always doesn't happen, unfortunately. All right, what are some disadvantages of diagnosis here? Well, one, I started the class with this, is that it misses the complexity of the individual. You're pigeonholing people. You're putting people into categories. You're forcing people to fit in these different holes that don't belong. You're missing, that Gene, Joe, and Jane are all uniquely individuals, and we're missing all that beautiful complexity. Well, remember from the beginning that the goal of a diagnostic or classification system is the accurate method of distributing into groups, classes, or families based on some similarities. So the goal of a diagnostic system isn't actually to completely capture the complexity of the individual, the uniqueness of the individual. Instead, it's to just take one teeny aspect of a person, the symptoms they're showing, and see what category those symptoms match up with. So a diagnostic system isn't attempting to capture all the complexity. It's just trying to capture just a teeny part of what that person is experiencing at any given time. We're not putting people into the schizophrenia bin and leaving them there forever. They're not into the pigeonhole of schizophrenia, even though, as you'll see right now with the second criticism here, well, it's third, actually, so I'll get to that in a minute. Another criticism of a diagnosis is that it could lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, if you tell a kid they're stupid enough over and over and over again, they're going to come to believe that they're stupid, they're going to act stupid, they're going to become stupid. Now, stupid is not a very good descriptive term. It's not in a diagnostic system, thank God. If you tell somebody, you worry too much, man, you worry all the time, you keep doing that, will that then, somebody say, well, you know what, I do worry a lot. Maybe I have generalized anxiety disorder. That's worry. I have generalized anxiety disorder. I'm going to worry more. Is there any evidence to suggest that that this self-fulfilling prophecy? Not really, actually. There's no strong evidence that no matter what the category is, if you keep telling somebody that over and over and over again, you can't pay attention for the life of you. You must be so ADHD. That doesn't cause ADHD. We have much better evidence for other causes of ADHD or generalized anxiety disorder. This is the one I thought I was getting to. Stigma. So if we take a teeny part of somebody and say these symptoms that you're showing me right now at this time are the symptoms of depression, does that mean that we put them into the depression bin forever? They're forevermore a depressive person. They're a mentally disordered, a mentally defective person. They've got depression forever and ever. No. Hopefully responsible researchers and clinicians wouldn't do that because that is stigmatizing. You're then castigating a person. You're giving them a label that shouldn't be negative in the first place and saying that is who you are. You're the depressive. But remember, we're talking about people here. And when it comes to diagnosis, we're talking about not the person. We're talking about the symptoms they're showing at this particular point in time. Right now, they're not always going to have them. They're not always the schizophrenic. They're not always the depressive. We're just dealing with the condition they have right now. When you have the flu, are you always the flu person? No. Your symptoms, wax and wane. They go away. You may get the flu more than once, but you're not forever castigated as, oh, that's a girl who has the flu all the time. You're not. We don't work that way, and it shouldn't happen in the realm of diagnosis, at least if it's done responsibly. So stigma remains a huge problem. We have to improve it, but there is nothing that says a diagnostic system per se has to be stigmatizing. All right, I have a few more more of these disadvantages, but we're going to run out of time, so I'll finish this up on Thursday, and then we'll shift our attention to assessment. What are the tools we use to actually make a diagnosis?